Designs by Sarah J. Thank you so much for joining me on Mondays with Marcus, the fabulous, fun project that the Marcus Fabric Designers are bringing you throughout the fall of 2020. This week we're focused on my Simply Squared wall hanging. Now this is a small project around 30 inches squared that's perfect for a wall or for a table topper, and I'm going to share some of my tips and tricks on accurate rotary cutting and how to speedily make this quilt. You really can make it within a day. The quilt features my Dance at Dusk fabrics. This is hands down my favorite fabric line that I've ever designed. I know if you follow along some of the fabric designers, you see a little bit about how fabric lines come into being. And with this line, my inspiration was a book. I know a lot of you have read Where the Crawdads Sing, and it was definitely my favorite book about a year ago. And I was just captivated by all the imagery that the author evoked. And so the color palette, these wonderful blues and greens, definitely drew their inspiration from that book. The line is anchored by this large-scale paisley that has all the colors. There's this wonderful dramatic stripe that captures both the deep green and the dark blue of the line. There's a fun little floral. I really love this print because it, again, has all the colors and it's just a great small-scale print. And then perhaps my favorite piece of the line is this viney leaf. And I drew this by hand in the computer. It came together exactly how I imagined, and it's available in 3 colorways. You'll see this in the quilt a lot. So I still have kits available on my website, designsbysarahj.com. I would love to have you make this project, and if you choose to use your own fabrics, that's fine too. Please share them with me on social media. You can find all the info at the end of this video about where I am on social media, and I'd love to have you tag your project with Simply Squared or with the Marcus Fabrics hashtag so I can see what you've made on your Marcus Mondays project. All right, let's get started with the cutting and sewing. All right, we're going to get started with the cutting and piecing. Make sure that you have downloaded your complementary pattern. If you go to my website, designsbysarahj.com, you'll see the Mondays with Marcus logo. Click on that logo and go to the page. It will tell you all about how you can access the complementary pattern. Get yours printed, get your fabric ready, and then we're going to start cutting the blocks. Now you'll notice that there are 9 of these framed 4-patch blocks. There are 4 alternately colored of the same block. And then the blocks are set on point with setting triangles and corner triangles and then a simple border. So I'm going to walk you through how to do that. I'll tell you a little bit about my piecing process, and you're going to have this quilt done by the end of the day. All right, we're going to talk about fabric preparation first. For me, I don't pre-wash, but what I do like to do is use a spray starch, and my personal favorite is Niagara spray starch, the non-aerosol kind. What I'll do is spray all of the fabrics. I would spray each piece that I'm going to use, let it set for 30 seconds to a minute, and then take a hot steam iron and press nicely so I can get rid of any wrinkles. I'll do this on both sides of every fabric I'm using. And then I've got nice crisp fabric that will cut easily and will handle more nicely while I piece. Of course, pre-washing is a personal decision. If you prefer to pre-wash, go for it. I'll just plan to wash my project in the end with a Shout color catcher or other dye magnet to catch any loose dye particles. I prefer not to pre-wash. So get your fabric ready and then we'll get started with cutting. So I want to go over my tips and tricks to get started with rotary cutting for you. First, make sure you have a good rotary mat that you really like. There are lots on the market. They all generally work about the same. I've owned this Quilter's Cut and Press forever. It is still one of my favorites. It's got an ironing surface on the other side, so it's portable. It's easy for me to lift up and down onto my ironing table and use that as my cutting table. My real secret is the Olfa rotary cutter paired with the Endurance blade. A couple of years ago, Olfa came out with this Endurance blade. It was a game changer. I always used to use the larger 60mm cutter. Now with the Endurance blade, I can cut just as many layers as I could with the 60mm cutter, and I just feel like I have more control with this smaller cutter. It also comes in fun colors, purple being my favorite color, so that's an added bonus. But if you haven't tried the Endurance blade, I really encourage you to do so. Just make sure you're super careful with your cutter because this blade is the sharpest on the market right now. So what I do is I take my ironed fabric, and it's already layered selvage to selvage, and so now I'm going to fold it one more time. So I've got 4 total layers here. You'll see that I've got the selvage edge nicely aligned, and then I'm going to lay that fold right up against the edge of the selvage. And my pattern tells me that I'm going to be cutting 2.5-inch squares from this. So I'm going to lay my ruler on the fabric, and I'm going to have just a little more than 2.5 inches showing under the ruler. I want to start by cutting a nice straight edge here that will be one side of my patchwork square. And one of my best tips for rotary cutting accuracy, see how I'm holding my hand so it's splayed out to cover as much of the ruler as possible. And then I'm going to open my blade, and I'm going to lay it down inside the fabric. I'm not going to start at the edge, and then I'm going to pull back toward me carefully and then move forward with that cut. By making a cut in this manner, I am not bunching that fabric up when I start to cut. And I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but you go to cut here at the start of the fold, and the fabric has a natural tendency to move. So by putting that blade down on the inside and pressing firmly and carefully pulling back toward you, those layers aren't going to shift. I'm now going to pull this away. I'm going to turn the mat, and this is a key feature of why I like to have a smaller mat than my table surface, so I can turn the mat, not the fabric, and not disturb those layers. And now I'm going to line up the 2.5-inch mark, spread my hand out again, and repeat the cutting sequence here. So now I've got a 2.5-inch strip. I can move that. I've got the fabric out of the way. Now the one time I will try to gently rotate my fabric is right here, because I don't want to be cutting all the way across my mat. That can affect accuracy if you're really stretching to cut. You want this relatively close to you. I'm going to trim off that selvage edge, get that out of the way, rotate the mat again, and now I'm ready to cut my 2.5-inch squares. And so here's the first set. This print appears in the block that we make 4 times, and so I'm going to just need to cut 2 sets of these to get 8, and that piece is cut and ready to go. So I'll move on with this technique, cutting all the fabrics that the pattern calls for, and then we'll talk a little bit about piecing tips and tricks. I've cut all the pieces now for the blocks and the quilt, and one thing I wanted to show you was my tip for how to make sure things are going to go the right direction in a block. Now this fabric line has some stripes, and I do use this blue and white stripe in the center of one of the framed 4 patches. And sometimes I don't care if stripes all go the same direction, but for this quilt I thought it really looked nice if the stripes did have some symmetry. So what I would do is stack up the squares that, the green fabric print squares, and you see I've set it on point so I can get an idea of how these are going to look visually in the quilt. And then I've got my stack of cut squares from the stripe, and I'm going to lay these and just experiment with how I want to see the stripe appear in the blocks. I can take these apart and stack them all up so they're all going exactly the same way. I can just play around. Do I want them to slant to the right here? Do I want them to go in opposite directions? And ultimately that is what I decided, that I wanted one to slant this way, one to slant that way. And so to make sure that this happens in the piece block, I'm going to lay my pieces on a little design board so I can have everything set up, and then I'm going to carry this over to my sewing machine like this, and then I'll sew this set of squares together first. I'll layer the print on top of the stripe, line up the edge, and sew with a 1/4-inch seam, and I'll do this entire stack of fabric first, and then I'll move down to this one. And by being careful to do these one at a time, I should keep all the stripes going the correct way. and then I'm going to like the project when it's all done. I'm going to use about a 2.1 stitch length on my Bernina. I like a little smaller stitch length when I've got smaller pieces like this. So go ahead and sew your 4 patches together, and then we'll be able to add the strips around the 4 patches and move on to assembling the quilt. I have the navy fabric here ready to cut my setting triangles for the sides and the corners. For the side setting triangles, those are 9 3/4 inch squares cut on the diagonal both ways. So I'm going to lay my ruler so I can see the 10-inch mark on top of the fabric, and I'm going to make the first 2 cuts here. I'm using the same setup with the rotary cutter, and I'm going to cut 2 sides, move the fabric away, and then I'm going to rotate the mat again, and now I'll lay the 9 3/4 inch mark on the newly cut edges, and I'll cut both of the remaining sides, and I've got a nice clean edge. And then I'm going to take my longer ruler and lay that on top here from corner to corner, and I'll cut across on both diagonals and have my 4 setting triangles. And then let me show you how we're going to put the blocks together on the wall so you can see the best methods for assembly. So we've had a great day of sewing, and it's time to start assembling the blocks. We've cut the setting triangles and the corner triangles according to the pattern. I've got my stack of blocks. If you have a wall in your house where you can lay the blocks out, I recommend that. It's a great way to make sure you have everything going in the right direction. If you don't have a wall, a floor could work, a bed, make do with what you have, because we all have different living situations, so we have to find success where we can. And so what I'm going to do now, I've got the blocks, and I'm going to start. I've got the pattern here on the floor beside me, and I'm just going to start laying these on the wall according to the pattern. The blocks are set 3 rows across, and I mentioned they're on point, and what that means is instead of being set side by side like this, they're corner to corner. So the corners are pointing up and down. And there are 9 blocks like this, and so I'm going to lay those out first. And you can see here how the stripe, I took time, remember, to tell you how to get the stripe to go in 2 different directions, and that's paid off because I think that's a really nice design element. And so you saw there why it's really important to lay the blocks out so that you can make sure that you've got them going the right way. See, if I wasn't careful, I could have that 4 patch in the wrong position, and instead I want it like this so everything's the same way. And now I'm going to grab the alternate blocks, and those fill in right here. And again, see how I made a mistake there? I want to make sure that these are going the correct direction, which means all the fabrics are in the same position. So I'm going to move that so the blue vine's there. And let's see, now we're ready for our triangles. And as I'm looking at the original version of the quilt I did, I actually had these fabrics oriented a little differently. So here I've got the green floral in the up-down position, and as I laid it out here, I've got it side to side. So if I want to make it just like the pattern, I'm going to turn these, and this is why a design wall is so helpful. If you lay everything out, you can take a look and make sure you've got things going the correct direction. I really recommend this rather than just trying to piece maybe from the paper. That's how you can make some mistakes. If you don't lay everything out, it's hard to visualize it sometimes. And now I've got these triangles, and I'm going to fill these in. And again, this is going to let me just kind of check the visual, and then I'll know how to do the rows. And so I'm just going to keep coming through here, get this all set up. You will have had 8 of these side triangles. You're only going to need 6. Do the last 2. And then we have the 4 corner triangles, which are the smaller triangles that we cut. And they obviously go on the corners. And so in terms of sewing this all together, with an on-point quilt, you're always going to want to sew diagonal rows. That's how you can avoid any kind of weird Y-seam or setting seam. So a diagonal row would be the side triangle, this block, and this block. And so they will sew the short edge of the triangle here to the block, this short edge here, and then that becomes a row. And then we'll repeat that across for all of the rows. I add the 2 corners on the short rows at the end so that I get a nice flat seam there. And I'm going to press seams in the opposite direction. So for this row, I'm going to always press to the left. For this row, I'll press to the right, and so on. You can go either way as long as you're alternating which direction you're going with the pressing. Again, that's going to make everything fit together nicely. And just a reminder, here's what your finished quilt is going to look like. You can add the border according to the pattern. That's just a simple strip of fabric, and then quilt it as desired. I went with just a wavy, close, irregular line. I wanted to give it a little bit of a modern touch, but of course quilt however you like, and then add your binding, and you're all done. I hope you've enjoyed the Simply Squares project, and I hope you're having a lot of fun with Mondays with Marcus. Be sure to check out my social media because there's information there about how you can win a prize during the first week of my post on Mondays with Marcus. I'll see you soon. Thanks so much.